Her father took her own life because he was getting jealous of how successful she was becoming in film. Judith Eva Barcy was born on June 6 of 1978 in Los Angeles, California. Her parents, Joseph and Maria, were originally from Hungary and had met at a restaurant in California. From a very young age, Maria was fascinated with Hollywood and was determined to make her daughter famous. Judith was discovered while she was ice skating one day and was asked to come out in a commercial. From there, it was just the start of her career, and she came out in the movies All Dogs Go to Heaven and Land Before Time. Judith was very small for her age, and she even started taking hormone injections to make herself grow. Her success helped her family thrive, and she was making about $100,000 a year, and her parents used that to buy a 3-bedroom house in Los Angeles. Although Judith's career was thriving, something sinister was going to happen behind the scenes. Judith's father had drinking problems, and he was angry with his daughter's success. He had threatened to unalive all 3 of them and had even gotten arrested 3 times for driving under the influence. Many of Maria's friends told her to leave her husband, but she refused because she was scared that she was going to lose the house, her belongings, and that he would unalive her somehow. On July 27th of 1988, around 8:30 a.m., the family's neighbor was watering her garden when she heard an explosion. That neighbor rushed to call 911 because she was afraid that Joseph had unalived his family. That neighbor was right because Joseph had shot Maria and Judith in the head and then poured gasoline everywhere and then shot himself. Judith and Maria were buried together in Hollywood Hills, California, and Joseph is said to be in an unmarked grave.
This monster mutilated and murdered over 300 kids, but was a free man for over a decade. Luis Garavito is one of the most sadistic serial killers who preyed over poor kids between the ages of 6 and 16. He would lure these kids with gifts, money, offering them jobs, even dressing as a priest or a homeless man to gain their trust. He would get these boys all alone in places like abandoned buildings or forests so that way no one can hear them scream for miles. And this is where his evil would thrive. He would tie them up so tightly that the rope would peel through their skin. He would take broken bottles and other sharp objects to mutilate them, to them, and even carve patterns onto their bodies. These suffering little boys was like a thrill to him. Once he was satisfied of the torture and so he just inflicted on these little boys, he would take their unalive bodies and dispose of them into a shallow grave and just let it rot. For years, this man went completely unnoticed because police thought that it was just linked to gang violence and that they were not going to get in between that. Bodies were just piling and piling up across 11 Colombian states, leaving no trace as to who did this until 1999. Luis was attempting to inappropriately assault another little boy, holding a knife his throat until a child heard his screams. This kid ran in the direction he heard these screams and started attacking Luis with rocks, hoping to scare him away, but it did the opposite. We started chasing these kids through the woods, screaming and threatening, "I'm gonna murder you!" But then he lost them and ended up outside the woods where he saw a little girl and asked her where the boys went, but she isn't dumb. She told him the opposite direction they went, which actually led to him getting caught by police later on. When investigators searched through his belongings, they found a notebook with hundreds of names, dates, and places. This man had a He confessed to murdering only like 150 boys, but police did not buy it, and they knew that count was like over 300. The scale of his crimes were horrifying, but even more disturbing was this man's lack of remorse. He did not care at all. Luis Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison. But in Colombia, the max sentence is 40 years before this man was eligible for parole in 2023. But don't worry, this man died October 12th of 2023 before even getting a chance to be free again. The lesson of today, trust nobody and be safe. Bye!
This is the haunting last photo of Fiona Anderson, who was 7 months pregnant when she jumped to her death after killing her 3 other children. This story needs a massive trigger warning, so proceed with caution. On April 15th, 2013, 23-year-old Fiona was found dead in Lowestoft, England. At the time of her death, she was 7 months pregnant with her 4th child, and authorities determined that she died after jumping off the Battery Green parking garage. After her body was found, police went to her home, and it was there that they discovered another horrific sight. Tucked into Fiona's bed were the bodies of her 3 children, 3-year-old Lavina, 2-year-old Addie, and 11-month-old Kaiden. It was later discovered that Fiona had drowned them all in the bathtub, drew hearts on all of their bodies, kissed their foreheads, leaving behind lipstick marks, and tucked each of them into her bed with all of their teddy bears. Fiona then wrote notes all over the walls, with one note saying, quote, "I love them and I'm going to keep them safe," and another note that said, quote, "They're cuddled up together sleeping. They look so peaceful." Fiona then wrote all of their names on her body, including the name Eve, which was what she was going to name her unborn daughter. And then she was caught on surveillance video walking around Lowestoft holding a teddy bear just hours before she jumped to her death. During the investigation into why she would have possibly done this, authorities found that just the day prior, she had an argument with the kid's father after finding out that he was in a new relationship. During that argument, Fiona stabbed him, and although he did receive treatment at the hospital, he told authorities that he'd been attacked by a man on the streets. He said he did this because he wanted to protect Fiona and avoid the kids being taken away from her. But after the altercation, Fiona sent him a text that said, quote, "Say goodnight to your children. It's the last time you will see them." End quote. And that would be the last time that he would ever see or hear from Fiona or the kids again, as they were all found the next day. A torn-up letter was recovered at the crime scene that Fiona had written that basically said she was unable to cope with the situation involving the kid's dad, and that she planned on taking her kids with her because, quote, "a mother never abandons her children," end quote. What's absolutely horrible is that this could have possibly been prevented. The family was really known to CYPS, with child protection cases open against them all the way back to 2009 with Fiona's first pregnancy. In just 3 years, social services had visited the family more than 50 times due to concerns of physical and emotional neglect. Child protection plans were put in place and legal intervention was considered. However, no action was ever taken. According to social services, the family was considered hard to reach as Fiona refused to meet with them. And because of that, no mental health assessment was ever given to her, despite CYPS visiting them more than 50 times. Even though there were numerous red flags, everyone in the story was failed, and it's a story that we hear far too often.
There's a reason that this is my most streamed and downloaded podcast episode of all time. It's the only episode I've actually been sent messages from prison. Imagine coming home from a night out one morning to find that your entire family have been brutally murdered and just witnessing the most horrific crime scene you can imagine. There was 8 people dead. Weirdly, pretty much every single person in that trailer was actually still in their bed. They were all dead in their beds. It was like a gang of intruders had gone in and killed this whole family while they slept. It was so chilling. There's honestly nothing more terrifying than the thought of that to me, but this is exactly what happened to Guy Hines Jr. in Glynn County. Now, Guy actually rang the police himself in a sheer panic, and I actually played the 911 call on the podcast episode, and it's so heartbreaking. Just a trigger warning. It's incredibly devastating. It's like he's having a breakdown, obviously, as you would, seeing a scene like that. But when police got to the crime scene, they actually turned this whole thing round on Guy himself. Despite the fact that the evidence showed that, as I said, these people were all in their beds asleep when this happened. Like, there is no way that one person would have been able to do that without anybody fighting back. Also, this was Guy's whole family. He had no motive to kill them. By some miracle, while Guy was on the phone to police, he actually realized one of the victims was still alive. And he, in a panic, was like, "Oh my God, somebody's still alive. Please get an ambulance here quickly." If he was the killer, why would he want the ambulance to save somebody who could potentially dob him in? From the crime scene, professionals did conclude that this had to be the work of a large group of people. And there were sickeningly bloody handprints on the ankles of the victims, proving they'd actually been held down while they'd been beaten to death. It actually doesn't bear thinking about. Blood spatter evidence was also really fascinating because it showed that these people had been attacked from both sides. So unless Guy himself was holding the victims' ankles down and also beating them from both sides of the bed at the same time, I don't understand how the police worked out that this was Guy's fault. This Guy had virtually no blood on him. No forensic evidence at all, actually, to confirm that he was the killer, but he got put in prison for this crime.
This is one of the darkest things I've ever seen on this app. This is 14-year-old Claire Miller, a seemingly normal teenager. She attended an expensive private school, did sports in middle school, co-class president. She would hang out and help her older sister Helen, who had cerebral palsy and relied on a wheelchair. And of course, enjoyed TikTok. Like most teenage girls in 2020 and 2021, Claire would post dancing and lip-syncing videos to her TikTok page, gaining an audience of over 20,000 followers. But then Claire's TikToks started to have a more darker tone to them. And then one night, Claire was laying in bed and she claims that she started seeing these things. And these hallucinations started telling her to go hurt herself. So Claire says that she got out of bed and went to the kitchen and grabbed a large knife. And these hallucinations kept telling her over and over again to hurt herself with it. So Claire claims she took the knife and started stabbing these hallucinations over and over again. But in reality, Claire was stabbing her sister Helen, who did tragically pass away from this. And this is why I do not believe Claire's story. First off, her story makes zero sense. She claims that she went to the kitchen, they followed her there, kept telling her to hurt herself, she had the knife in her hand, stabbed the hallucinations. But Helen was found stabbed while she was sleeping in her bed. So the hallucinations made her go into her sister's room. And also, reportedly, Claire had recently told a couple friends that she was having these urges to hurt someone. And she said multiple really insensitive things about what she did to her sister to a police officer, including, "I just Michael Myered my sister." And if for some reason you're not familiar with who Michael Myers is, he's the horror villain in the Halloween series who, in the beginning of the first movie, killed his sister with a knife. Personally, and this is just my opinion, you're welcome to your own, I think that Claire was a mentally unwell teenager who wanted to hurt someone, and her sister was an easy target who couldn't fight back, and this story was just a creative defense strategy. Claire ultimately was tried as an adult and sentenced up to 40 years in prison, and a lot of her TikToks are still online, and now they're just so creepy to look back on.
Like I'm dead, you killed me, I'm dead now.
We need to talk about what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi right now and how 215 bodies were just found buried in a field behind a jail. I honestly don't know how this isn't national news by now. 215 bodies were just found buried in unmarked graves behind the Hinds County Jail, or more specifically, the Hinds County Penal Farm in Jackson, Mississippi. Some of the grave sites were completely unmarked, while others were only identified by a number on a metal rod. The family members of these victims were never notified that their loved ones were buried, and the majority of them still just thought that they were missing. And the state in which this mass graveyard was found is absolutely horrendous. The bodies were placed in body bags and never embalmed before being buried in a shallow grave. And the stench was reportedly so bad that it attracted birds and other animals to try and scavenge for the remains. This discovery has made many question why authorities never investigated these deaths, and why they also chose to never contact the victims' family members before burial. What's even more disgusting is the fact that now that this has gone public, authorities want the victims' family members to pay a fee to collect their loved ones' bodies. This discovery all started because of a mom who was searching for her missing son, Dexter Wade. This is Betterston Wade, and she last saw her son Dexter on March 5th, 2023 around 7:30 p.m. when he left her home. After not being able to contact him, Betterston officially reported Dexter missing to police on March 14th, although at first she was hesitant to do so because she didn't trust the Jackson Police Department. Just 4 years prior, Betterston's 62-year-old brother died after a Jackson police officer slammed him into the ground. That officer was convicted of manslaughter, but he's currently trying to appeal. Because of this, she was scared to report Dexter missing to that same police department, but she ultimately thought that's what was best to try and find him. The case, unfortunately, was not taken seriously from the very start, as the initial investigator assigned to the case misspelled Dexter's name as Dester. But Betterston gave the police department photos of him and remained in constant contact for updates. She reached out to the police department multiple times over the span of months, but every single time they told her that they had no updates for her, which was not true at all. In fact, they knew where Dexter was from the very beginning. Just 30 minutes after leaving his mom's home the night he went missing, Dexter was hit and killed by an off-duty Jackson police officer in a police SUV. At the time of the incident, the officer was not cited for any traffic violations, he wasn't given a field sobriety test, and Dexter's death was ruled accidental. Now, Jackson police say they were unable to identify him at his time of death, but according to the autopsy, the medical examiner, and from Dexter's body eventually being exhumed, it was found that his driver's license had been in his front pocket the entire time. At first, Jackson PD said they couldn't identify him, but then they changed their story to say that they called Dexter's mom once to inform her of his death, but when she didn't answer, they never tried calling again, even despite the medical examiner giving them that information from the start. Even though Dexter was hit by a Jackson police officer and was reported missing with that same department, whenever Betterston called for updates, they always told her that they were unable to find him. In reality, they'd sent him off to that mass gravesite to be buried in an unmarked grave. That same gravesite where 215 bodies were now just discovered. It wasn't until nearly 8 months later that Jackson PD told Betterston where she could find her son. They took her down that long dirt road, deep into the woods, past an empty horse stable and scrapyard behind the Hinds County Penal Farm. As As they walked further into the field, they passed rows of metal rods, each marked with a number, in which we now know were actually graves. They eventually stopped at grave number 672, where Dexter had been laying for months unclaimed due to the negligence of Jackson PD. Betterston then had to pay them $250 to claim his body and have him properly buried. Because of this discovery, 2 other men who were buried and forgotten in this graveyard have been identified. One is Jonathan David Hankins, who was reported missing in June of 2022. His family only learned of his death from news outlets on December 4th, not through law enforcement. Jonathan was burned and buried on this field. Another victim is Mario Moore. He was also burned and buried in an unmarked grave in this same field after he was found beaten to death and wrapped in tarp back in February. His family didn't learn about his burial until 8 months after he was killed. Families of the victims are now calling for a federal investigation to uncover the truth about what is really happening in Jackson, Mississippi.
She murdered her boyfriend and then tried to feed him to his own children. This is a case that will give you nightmares. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of John Price. Catherine Knight was born in October 1955 in New South Wales, Australia. She was raised within an abusive household within a sort of small farming community. She alleged that throughout her childhood, she would have to witness her father horrifically beaten and SA-ing her mother. And growing up, Catherine herself would mirror her dad's violent tendencies. After dropping out of school, Catherine would find a job within a slaughterhouse where they would kill between 500 and 600 animals daily. Catherine's responsibilities included skinning and boning the animals. She was described as being very good with a knife. She was very good at her job and she really enjoyed it, but weirdly a little bit too much. Her enjoyment for what she was doing raised some eyebrows between her co-workers. Throughout her adult life, Catherine would be in a string of abusive relationships where more often than not she would be the main perpetrator. She would marry a man named David Kellett, and on their wedding night, only hours after saying their vows, after sleeping together, when David fell asleep, Catherine would wrap her hands around his neck and try to strangle him to kill him. She was unsuccessful in this, but this wouldn't be her last attempt on his life. Throughout their 10-year relationship, Catherine would be abusive towards David, often relentlessly beating him, but David never reported it to the police because he was scared. The couple would go on to have 2 daughters, and not long after the birth of their first daughter, when their child was only around about 2 months old, Catherine almost killed her by putting her down on some train tracks when a train was approaching. This came after an argument with David. Catherine wanted to show him what she was capable of. After the birth of their second daughter, Catherine would seriously wound David by stabbing him with some scissors. Eventually, Catherine would be the one to leave David, and like I say, she was in a string of very unhealthy, toxic, abusive, violent relationships, causing terror wherever she went. After an argument with one of her boyfriends, she was so angry with him that she actually killed his puppy. In her late 30s, Catherine met and would begin dating John Price. John would be described as a good man. He was hardworking, he was likeable, he was a people person, he was very popular, and he was very caring. He would often go around to his neighbours' homes just to check in on them and make sure they were okay. He was the type of person that would make time for anyone, and he was also a devoted father to his 2 children. Not too long into their relationship, Catherine would begin to nag John that she wanted to get married, but John wasn't having any of it. He was very firm that he did not want to marry Catherine. And the more he refused, the angrier that Catherine got, and the worse her abuse towards him would become. She would not only verbally and mentally abuse John, she would also abuse him physically, going so far as to actually stabbing him. He would confide in his friends and his co-workers about what was happening, and he even told his co-workers that if he didn't show up to work or if anything happened to him, it would be Catherine that would be responsible. In February 2000, John returned back home from a long day at work. He popped into a neighbour's house to have a little catch up with them, have a little natter before returning back home, having his tea and going to bed at around about 11 p.m. He would be closely followed by Catherine, and when Catherine got in the bedroom, they slept together before John fell asleep. Catherine would then retrieve a knife that she had stashed in her bedside table and in a frenzy began to stab John. Being awoken by being stabbed, John tried to fight Catherine off. He managed to run out of the bedroom, along the hall, down the stairs, and he just reached the door when Catherine caught up to him and dragged him back into the living room, continuing her attack, sadistically stabbing him up to 37 times and killing him. After the murder, Catherine would go on to do the unthinkable. Using her skills that she had picked up from her time in the slaughterhouse, she skinned John, hanging his flesh up on butcher's hooks on the doors. She would slice some of his muscle off of his back, and she actually went on to cook it, take out his children's plates, load those with vegetables with the intent of serving John's children his own flesh. She would also decapitate John, and his head was later found on the stove bubbling away in a stew. The following day, when John Price didn't show up to work and didn't call in sick, his co-workers knew that something was wrong, and doing what John had asked, they contacted the police and requested they conduct a welfare check. When the officers arrived at the home, they knocked on the door but got no answer. They began to shout through the door but again got no answer. One of the officers would get to his knee and peek through the letterbox, but he couldn't really see into the house because there was a curtain or a blanket or something like that restricting his view. They would eventually force entry into the home, and that is when they realised that what they had saw wasn't a curtain and it wasn't a blanket, it was John's skin. The scene that these officers walked into was like something out of a horror movie. Blood was smeared everywhere, it was splattered all up the walls, it covered the entire floor. There were body parts lay around, John's torso was found on the floor, and most hauntingly, they would find John's decapitated head on the stove inside of the stew. Catherine would be discovered in the bedroom in a coma after she had taken an overdose. She awoke from the coma just under a week later, and when she awoke, she feigned having no idea what had happened. She would be arrested, and initially again she would continue to tell her story that she had no idea what had happened, but eventually she would confess to murdering John, but she said that it was in retaliation for all the abuse that she had received from John over however long they were together. At trial, she would plead not guilty and try to feign mental illness by crying and screaming and shouting within the courtroom. However, no one was buying it. Partway through the trial, she would change her plea to guilty. Catherine Knight would be the first woman in Australian history to be handed a whole life order. That means that for the rest of her natural life, she will stay behind bars. She is still alive now, still serving her sentence at 69 years old at Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre.
She was murdered just meters away from her boyfriend, but he had no idea it had even happened. Morgan Fox and her boyfriend Jason Scarnecchia lived in Plain Township with Morgan's 8-year-old daughter. Morgan was such an amazing mum. She was hardworking, she was smart, she was intelligent, she was stunning. She used to get up at 1 a.m. to start her shift for FedEx as an operations manager. But on the 28th of October 2020, her boyfriend woke up alone as normal in the house, looked out the window and could see Morgan's car still there in the drive, but he was like, well, she should have gone to work ages ago, so where's Morgan? Now, I go into a load more detail on the podcast episode about this on the Bourne investigation, but essentially he went down to take a closer look. Horrifically, when he got to the car, he found Morgan inside, deceased, from a gunshot wound. Jason rang 911 and everybody said his 911 call seemed so strange, and I play it on the podcast episode if you're interested, but it basically just felt like he was in shock. Police rushed over and sure enough found Morgan dead in the driver's side of her car. But the crime scene made absolutely no sense. There was no evidence of SA, there was nothing taken. This wasn't a robbery, there was money actually visibly in the middle of the car that hadn't been taken. Some things police did notice though at the crime scene were that Morgan's phone was on the floor, which they were obviously able to take and look at. Her bag was also on the floor, and mud was splattered on a nearby fence from presumably another car. Now, annoyingly, no neighbours heard anything or even captured anything on their Ring doorbells, which was really unusual. So police focused on the boyfriend, and honestly, they really grilled him. They were like, why are you acting so suspiciously? Why are you so blunt on the 911 call? But they searched the couple's home and there was no G powder residue anywhere, which really indicated that he was telling the truth. They then went to Morgan's work. They were like, right, if the boyfriend's not involved, maybe it was a colleague. Maybe she'd argued with somebody at work. And it turned out there was some beef with a few different people at work. I think Morgan had basically kind of like worked her way up the ranks. And as I said, she was really hardworking. She was in quite a senior position. So I think a lot of people at work were jealous, to be honest. And one incident at work really stood out to investigators. This was an incident where Morgan had actually had her private phone swiped, her like personal mobile phone and people had looked through her own intimate private photos that were intended just for her boyfriend. They figured out the guy that did this was actually another Jason. Sorry, this is really confusing, but this Jason is called Jason McDermott and we'll call him Work Jason. Now this had all happened 3 weeks before she died. So the timeline was kind of suspicious. But when Work Jason was questioned about this, he was honestly quite defensive and he deflected things and he said he felt that Morgan and her boyfriend Jason weren't on good terms. And Work Jason was also posting like really long, gushy social media posts, almost making out like they were best friends. But here's the really strange part. 2 things that Jason discussed with police made absolutely no sense. Firstly, he lied about the situation where he stole Morgan's phone. He actually said that he looked at the intimate photos for literally a couple of seconds and then threw the phone down. But CCTV actually showed he was there looking at her intimate photos for over 50 minutes. Also, this is really suspicious. He actually lied to police about his movements the morning of the murder. Now, he interestingly went for a car wash. We know that from CCTV, but he didn't tell police. He left that part out of the story. So it's like, if that was an innocent car wash, why didn't you tell police about it? Like I said, there's way more detail on my podcast episode about this, but essentially he had some really dodgy things on his personnel file at work too. Police searched Jason's family home and found that the G's that the parents had actually matched the G that would have been used in the crime. Police also searched Jason's car and found there was G powder residue inside. And obviously the suspicious car wash made perfect sense if you remember about the mud splashed up the fence from the crime scene. Final kind of nail in the coffin for Work Jason was the fact that CCTV literally showed him heading towards Morgan's house the morning of the murder. Possibly the most disturbing part of this entire case for me is the fact that Work Jason had over 100 photos of Morgan saved on his phone, as well as videos that he'd taken in secret of like her crotch basically. It turns out he was A, obsessed with her obviously, and B, really concerned that she was going to get him in trouble at work over this phone snatching incident. He was found guilty at trial and was given life without the possibility of parole.
Everyone failed this 5-year-old girl, and this case is sure to make your blood boil. Both of Harmony Montgomery's parents struggled with addiction and broke up before she was born. Her mother, Crystal, had full custody of her because her father, Adam, was in prison. And when Harmony was 2 months old, she was removed from Crystal's custody for the first time. Harmony would be removed and removed from her mother's custody 3 times before her father, Adam, was given full custody following his 2015 release from prison, where he was convicted in shooting a man in the head during a substance deal. Adam actually had an extensive violent history, but this judge still thought it would be a good idea for Harmony to live with Adam and his wife, Kayla. Multiple calls and multiple home checks were done of the Montgomery home, including a January 2020 home check where Harmony could not be found. And Adam explained it away, saying that Harmony had been living with her mother, Crystal, since Thanksgiving. 2 weeks later, someone did leave a voicemail on Crystal's phone to try and confirm if Harmony was living with her. They never received a call back and never followed up. At the end of 2021, an acquaintance of Harmony's mother, Crystal, called police and said that no one had seen Harmony since 2019. Shortly after that, that's when Crystal finally told police that she hadn't seen or spoken to her daughter in over 2.5 years. I hope you guys are still sticking with me because I know this case has a complicated timeline. Because this entire case is just filled with people failing this beautiful little girl, the police did not start searching for Harmony until 5 weeks later. Well, of course, Adam didn't have an explanation why no one had seen Harmony in 2.5 years, so Adam and Harmony's stepmother, Kayla, were arrested. Kayla did ultimately end up telling police that Adam had killed Harmony on December 7th, 2019, while the family was homeless and living in their car. Adam repeatedly hit 5-year-old Harmony until she stopped breathing because she was having trouble potty training, and it made him angry. Because I'm sure neither of her neglected ass parents helped properly potty train her. Last month, Adam was found guilty but won't be sentenced until May. And probably one of the most sad parts of this incredibly sad case is Harmony's body still has yet to be found, so she has not been able to be properly put to rest. Of course, I don't know, but I think maybe before they actually sentence Adam, they might try and do a plea deal to try and find Harmony's remains, but let me know what your opinions are on that. I'm going to be finally batch filming some YouTube content over the weekend, so let me know a case I've covered in the past that you'd want to see me do like a longer deep dive on in the comments below.
Before you listen to this murder confession call, just know that I couldn't put my bins out last night because I was so freaked out. It was 1989 in Frederick in Maryland, and Tracy Kirkpatrick was literally just 17. She was intelligent, pretty, friendly, and she loved poetry. She had 3 siblings, and she was a really hardworking girl. I think she actually even had more than one part-time job while she was studying. One of these jobs was shop assistant at a women's sports clothing shop in Westridge Square Shopping Centre. One night though, on the 15th of March, just before 9 p.m, she was doing the closing shift. But she would never make it out of the shop alive. A couple of hours went by before a security guard for the shopping centre noticed that weirdly, all of the lights were on in that shop, despite the fact that it should have been closed. So he went inside to check it out, but nobody was in there. And this would freak me out so much. He was like walking around the shop, like calling out, hello, hello, and nobody was answering. Honestly, it gives me the shivers. Then he went into the back, and the scene was horrific. There was like droplets of blood, and then there was Tracy, dead on the floor. She'd clearly been stabbed in a very, very vicious attack. So this security guard immediately rang police, obviously, and by the time police showed up, Tracy's parents had actually showed up because they were so worried that she hadn't come home. Her mum was literally so distressed that she actually passed out from shock. Now, the police really couldn't figure out this crime scene. There was no like obvious motive. She hadn't been essayed and nothing had been stolen apart from her own bag. But there was like money in the shop and that hadn't been touched. Police also said this must have been either somebody in authority or somebody who knew Tracy, who'd come into the shop to do this to her, because there was no signs of like a struggle or forced entry. And honestly, things just kind of grinded to a halt with this investigation, frustratingly, until 3 months later.
Hello, my name is Don, and I'm calling from Frederick, Maryland. I know this is going to sound surprising, but 3 months ago, I stabbed a girl to death. And you might think that in making this tape, I'm setting myself up to be caught, but there are a lot of guys named Don in Frederick. The girl I killed was working in a ladies' sportswear store. I often came by and talked to her when she was working alone. And one night when she was in the storeroom and we were talking, our conversation turned into an argument. And so I took out a knife that I have with me at all times, and I killed her. And a few days later, I realized that I had created a lot of sadness. And I thought about turning myself into the police. But whatever they do to me, that won't bring Tracy back. So I decided that I better keep free because we have the death penalty in Maryland. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry about what I did, but nothing can change it. Bye.
That was when that phone call came in to this like anonymous tip hotline. Police obviously wanted to trace where this call came from, and they traced it to a Safeway supermarket in Walkersville, Maryland. But annoyingly, it wasn't like traced to an address, so they couldn't exactly go to anywhere to get this person. But then a woman rang police. Now, this woman was like a psychic or something, but she told them that she'd been contacted by this weird guy who just seemed really obsessed by this case, and he wanted her to like look into it in terms of like the psychic. She just felt like he was weirdly invested for just a randomer. He'd even posted her loads and loads of newspaper clippings about the crime, and actually it had a return address on the envelope, so she gave this over to police, and guess where they traced this to? Exactly like that police call that came in, this person was also in Walkersville. But when police actually investigated the guy that they believe sent those letters, sent that stuff to the psychic, they concluded that he wasn't involved. I don't know how they did, but they concluded he wasn't the guy. Obviously, from the telephone call that came in, the guy had said his name was Don. Well, one of the creepiest things I think about this case is that security guard who found Tracy dead on the floor, his name was Don. He was Don Barnes Jr., and his daughter actually claimed that he was a really violent man. She said that he'd been abusive to her mum. And I mean, technically, he was the one who found her. He would have had the time and the opportunity to commit the crime, and he was a person in authority that she would seemingly have just let in. I was also wondering why it took so long to notice that the lights were all on in that shop. As it stands though, Tracy's case is unsolved. They do, I believe, have DNA from the crime scene, so who knows if maybe in the future Tracy's case will get solved, but I hope so.
Did the ghost of this woman try and help solve her own disappearance? I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the disappearance of Sandra Hughes. When COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic in 2020, the entire world shut down. People were locked down into their homes, businesses had to close, and many people have vastly different experiences of this time. For Sandra Hughes, she saw this as an opportunity. 54-year-old Sandra had spent most of her adult life moving across America, living in different cities, in different states. She never really put roots down anywhere. Growing up, her dream job was to be a park ranger. She absolutely loved the great outdoors. She was very in touch with nature, but sadly, life didn't take her down that path. She ended up finishing college and then going to work as an accountant. When the 2020 lockdowns hit, Sandra decided that she wasn't going to be quarantining inside of her house. Instead, she was going to take this as an opportunity to go on a very long camping trip out in the wilderness. She was fully trained in wilderness survival, so this is something that she believed that she would be able to do with ease. On the 26th of June, she drove from her new home in California all the way to the Sierra National Forest. She parked up her silver sedan, took out her camping gear, chucked it over her shoulder, and excitedly headed out into the woods. 6 days later, a couple of hikers who were making their way through the Johnson Meadows, a picturesque but dangerous area. Wild animals such as bear and cougars could be found there. While walking through this area, the hikers would notice a campsite. As they began to get closer to the campsite, they would notice that the campsite was in absolute disarray. The tent was completely ruined. There was an empty backpack on the floor, and it looked like the contents of the backpack had just been dumped out of the bag. There was tins of food there was papers, there was documents, there was all sorts. It looked like somebody had just ransacked this campsite, or maybe it had been attacked by a wild animal. The owner of this campsite was nowhere to be found. The hikers would report what they found to the sheriffs, who quickly arrived to investigate. They would rummage around the contents, what had been poured out of that backpack, and found an ID. The name on the ID being Sandra Hughes. They tried to contact Sandra, but when they couldn't get in touch with her, they then tried to contact her family, who immediately upon hearing what the sheriffs had to say, what had been found, they knew that something was wrong. Sandra was not the type of person who would even litter, so there was absolutely no way that she would leave behind an entire campsite the way that she did. She was very green, she was very in touch with nature, and she was very eco-friendly. She would never leave all of that dumped out in the wilderness. After hearing this, the family filed a missing persons report. Hundreds of people, including officers, rangers and volunteers, all pitched in trying to help find Sandra. A huge search was conducted. Police were speaking with other hikers who had been in the area and asked them if any of them had seen Sandra. She was quite distinctive and someone that police thought people would remember, because at this moment in time she had bright blue hair. But no one had. It would be 2 days into the investigation that the police got their first proper lead. Sandra had been spotted. Some hikers who were going through the Johnson Meadows spotted who they didn't know at the time was Sandra. She was wearing a black t-shirt, blue jeans, and she had her very distinctive blue hair, but she had no shoes on and she had no hiking or camping gear with her. She also had a very noticeable bruise on her face. Despite all of this, her having no shoes on, no gear, and a bruise on her face, these campers just left her be. She didn't seem distressed, she didn't call out to them for help or anything like that, so after observing her and seeing her, these couple of campers just went off on their way. It wouldn't be till they were back at the car park that they saw the missing person posters and realised that the woman on this poster was the woman they had just seen in the Johnson Meadow. Police went to the area that the hikers described seeing Sandra, but by the time they arrived, she was nowhere to be seen. The next day, Sandra's silver sedan would be found in the bottom of a ravine. Whoever had been driving the car, likely Sandra, had actually crashed into a tree, and after the crash, the car kind of tumbled down into the ravine. Inside the car, there was no blood or anything that would suggest anyone got injured inside of the car. However, weirdly, kind of surrounding the car was all of Sandra's belongings, so everything that she would have had inside of the car looked like it had just been pulled out and chucked. It looked like how the stuff did back at the campsite, the stuff that had been dumped out of the backpack. As the days and the weeks progressed with no sign of Sandra and no sign of the case moving forward, the investigation had to be scaled back down. It wouldn't be till around about 4 weeks later that the police would get their next proper lead. 2 hunters were driving up a windy, desolate road nearby where Sandra's sedan was found, and they're just driving along when they look up and they notice a woman standing at the tree line. She stands out because she stood at the tree line, but she looks a little bit out of place. She's wearing a flowery t-shirt and some overalls, and she's just staring out into the abyss. Noticing that she had no equipment or anything with her, the hunters pulled over to make sure she was okay, to ask if she needed any help, and as they're calling to her, shouting to her, asking if she is okay and if she needs any help, Sandra continues to just blankly stare into nothing. It was like they weren't even there. Eventually they just left her to it, let her carry on with whatever she was doing, and again, it wouldn't be till they got to the car park that they saw a missing persons form and realised that that woman that they saw was Sandra. They were certain of it due to her distinctive blue hair. What was strange though was that they described Sandra wearing something completely different to what the police believed she was wearing. They thought she was wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans, but these hunters described her as wearing a flowery top and overalls. So had she gone back to the campsite to get changed? Had she found these clothes somewhere? We don't know. Police were dispatched to the area that the hunters told them that they saw Sandra, but by the time they arrived, she was long gone and left no trail behind. Over a year later, after Sandra's disappearance, a family consisting of parents Jake and Victoria were heading for a day out and were driving through the Sierra National Forest. Having already drove for a little while at this point, they decided to pull over and set up a little picnic in a lovely little meadowy area. As Jake and Victoria are grabbing what they need for the picnic, they noticed that one of their sons, 3-year-old Caden, strapped in the back seat, was talking away to someone, but it wasn't any of his siblings. Victoria turned around and asked Caden, "Who are you talking to?" When Caden, who was fixated, staring out towards the forest, replied something along the lines of, quote, "There's a woman out there and she needs our help. She's lying face down, her legs are straight up, and she's dead." The dad, Jake, would follow Caden's direction into the forest where Caden was adamant that he could see this woman, but when Jake got there, there was no one there, despite how insistent Caden was that this woman that he was seeing was right there. The family wasted no time in turning on their heels and driving back out of the Sierra National Forest. That evening, Victoria logged onto Facebook and wrote a status detailing about the weird interaction that she had had with Caden on that day, writing in the post exactly what Caden said he saw and who he saw, and this got the attention of the police. They contacted Victoria and asked Victoria if they could speak to Caden, and he would relay onto police exactly what he relayed onto his parents, that he had seen a woman, she was dead and she needed help. But what caught the police attention was the description that Caden gave of the woman. She was a woman wearing a black t-shirt, blue jeans, and she had blue hair. They were presenting with several photographs photographs of several different women, almost like a lineup, and asked Caden could he point to the woman who he saw was the woman he saw in one of these photos, and she was. He pointed to 3 different pictures that had the woman that he saw, and all 3 pictures were of Sandra Hughes. Had her ghost reached out to him, desperate for help? As of today, Sandra's disappearance is still unsolved.
This is the story of Bonita Jacks. Born in 1974, Bonita grew up in Charles County, Maryland, raised by her mother, Mamie Jacks. Now, during her childhood, she struggled academically, so much so that Bonita said that she had dropped out in the 6th grade due to learning disabilities, but her school record showed that she stayed enrolled till she was a sophomore. In 1991, at the age of 17, Bonita became pregnant by a man named Arthur Penn. Due to this pregnancy, she officially dropped out of school and started working retail and service jobs up until 96 when she gave birth to her second daughter, Tatiana Jacks. Bonita remained a single mother until the year 2000. Around this time, she was working as a hairstylist in Washington, D.C. when she met Nathaniel Fogel. He will come in and get his hair braided, and the two instantly hit it off and started dating. Nathaniel knocked up Bonita almost immediately, with their first child, Kaya, being born in 2001, and their second child, Asia, quickly following behind, being born in 2002. Now, by late 2005, financial hardship had hit the family so hard that they got evicted from their apartment. With nowhere else to go, Bonita had to move back in with her mother, and her mother welcomed her home up to her and her 4 girls. But Nathaniel could not live there, and she made that very clear, and Bonita didn't like it, but she didn't have nowhere else to go. One day while Mamie, her mother, was away, Bonita decided to sneak in Nathaniel, thinking that she would be gone for a long period of time. But Mamie came home. She came home and found Nathaniel in Bonita's room, and she's pissed. She threw his ass right out. Now, this pissed Bonita off, and it caused tension between the two. Since Mamie wasn't letting Nathaniel come over or stay, Bonita just said, fuck it. I'm going to pack up me and all my children, and we're just going to go be with him. Now, her mother wanted the kids to stay, but Bonita said, no, I want us all to be together. So from December of 05 to about April of 06, the family is homeless. They're living out of their van. They're going from shelter to shelter. And if that wasn't bad enough, around this same time, Nathaniel gets diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. Now, this took an even bigger toll on the family. Nathaniel started his cancer treatments, but a lot of times he would leave mid-treatment against doctor's orders. And the doctors is like, what's going on with this family? They decided to contact Child and Family Services. This was considered a red flag. They found out that both Bonita and Nathaniel was abusing drugs and that the family was living in a van. Now, Child and Family Services dropped the case because they didn't have a physical address for the two. But in August of that same year, the family finally gets some good news with the help of a housing nonprofit. Bonita and Nathaniel was blessed with a home. They can finally get up out that van. Even though Nathaniel's health was still declining, the two were just happy that they had somewhere to permanently lay their heads. But Nathaniel's time in the house was short-lived because in early February of 2007, his cancer had turned terminal and he had to go to hospice. He died on February 19th. Now, this was the turning point of Bonita's mental state. She was so overwhelmed with grief and untreated psychosis that she refused to even go to his funeral. She was even telling her youngest 2 daughters that their father was still alive. A couple weeks after Nathaniel's death, Bonita cut off all ties to the outside world. She boarded the windows up to their home. She pulled her 16-year-old out of school and refused to let the girls go anywhere. But Brittany had a boyfriend at school who was becoming worried because he has not seen her. So he decided to go to the house. Now, Bonita opened the door for him and let Brittany talk to him very briefly while she stood directly behind her. She let the two hug and she kind of shooed him off. That was the last time he seen her. After about a month passed and Brittany still hasn't returned to school, the social worker decided to do a home visit. Bonita answered the door but refused to let the social worker come in. But from where she was standing, she could see the 2 youngest girls on the couch and they looked unkept to her. Bonita told the social worker that she didn't want Brittany to come to school because she feared that Brittany was going to run away. This is when the social worker contacted Child and Family Services to file a report. She told them that she thinks these girls are being held hostage. And what did Family Services do? Mistakenly closed the case, saying that the family moved across state lines back to Maryland. This was an unverified assumption. She even called a police sergeant's cell phone, asking him to go do a welfare check on the girls. And when he went out there, he said that the girls looked clean and well fed, and he did not file a report. Around Mother's Day, Bonita's neighbors witnessed her and two of her children removing all the furniture from their house, putting some on the curb and some in the backyard. She told her neighbors that the furniture was up for grabs and that it was infested with ants. And by June, the children had completely disappeared. When the neighbors would ask Bonita about the children, she would say that they were upstairs or in South Carolina with family. But as time went by, the children never returned. And as time went by, there was an odor coming from the row house. Now, there was a pest issue that the residents were having. So they were thinking that it was a rat died inside of the wall or something like that. Crime was the last thing on their minds. By September, all of the power was cut off in Bonita's house due to non-payment. When she went to ask her neighbor for some water and a cigarette, her neighbor noticed that Bonita was significantly smaller. Bonita told the neighbor that she had cancer. On January 9th, 2008, armed with an eviction notice, U.S. Marshals pulled up to Bonita's house. She opened the door wearing a filthy t-shirt and looking completely crazy. When she seen that she was getting evicted, she tried to shut the door on the marshal, and he wedged his boot between the door, forcing the door open. Now, when he forced the door open, he smelt the foul odor. Making their way upstairs, they can't believe their eyes because in one room, they found the three youngest girls laying side by side, ranging from youngest to oldest. All three girls were wearing a white t-shirt and they were all mummified. In a separate room was 16-year-old, now 17-year-old Brittany, who was completely nude, laying on a white t-shirt with a knife laying next to her, and she was a skeleton. Bonita was immediately arrested, and during interrogation, she told the detectives that her children were possessed by demons and that she starved them to weaken the demon. She said her children died one by one, peacefully in their sleep, and she left them there because she thought that they would be resurrected. She said that she got rid of all of her furniture because she thought that it was possessed as well, even though she told the neighbors that her furniture was infested with ants. She said she kept her oldest daughter away from her three youngest daughter because Brittany had a Jezebel spirit on her and that she didn't want it to rub off on the little ones. The police are thinking this is why Brittany probably died first. And you can tell that she put up a fight when she died, which is probably why she used the knife. But the knife didn't hit any arteries, so they don't know if Brittany died from starvation or the knife wounds because her body was so badly decomposed. Her estimated time of death is between May and June of 2007, and the younger three girls roughly between June and August of 2007. The younger three were strangled, but Bonita pled not guilty, claiming her innocence. She said that she still never harmed any of her children. Her defense team wanted her to plead insanity, but Bonita refused, saying that she was completely sane. Her trial started in July of 2009, and her mother testified not seeing Bonita in years. Her mother hasn't seen her or the grandchildren since she left that day to be with Nathaniel. Mamie is shocked by all this because she said Bonita was never harmful to her children, but Bonita's friend took the stand as well, and she said that Bonita and Nathaniel will allow the girls to smoke marijuana just for shits and giggles. The police officer that did the welfare check also took the stand, saying that he didn't file the report because it wasn't mandatory. Mind y'all, he didn't file the report until the day that the bodies were found. And then he changed his story a couple days later. Initially, he said he seen the three girls and they was well kept, well fed, blase scoop. Couple days later, he changed it and said Well, I thought I seen Brittany as well. He thought. Bonita was found guilty of 4 counts of felony murder, 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, and 4 counts of child cruelty. She was acquitted of premeditated first-degree murder of Brittany because there was no evidence on the knife. She was sentenced to 120 years in a highly specialized psychiatric federal prison facility, as she should, because let's think about this. She was in this house, no utilities, with 4 corpses that are her daughters for 7 months. Do you know how off you gotta be to sit in the dark every day for months with your deceased daughters? And y'all saying all this because she lost her man? I'm speechless, Yellow Tape. I'm speechless with this one. Shout out to that social worker, because if it wasn't for her, no telling how long this would have went on. Rest in peace to all 4 girls. Bonita Jax. I don't even know. What y'all think?
You might want to go grab some tape your jaw shut, because odds of your jaw being on the floor when you hear this story are high. But I'm happy to say it's the best ending to the worst story. Guys, this is the very first story I ever told on TikTok, and back then I pronounced her name wrong. I said Alison Botha, but I think it's Alison Botha. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probably so wrong, but I just went to her TikTok profile to make sure I pronounced it correctly. She follows me. Allison, yeah, I'm never gonna get over that. Allison, message me, I need to talk. Nevertheless, this is the story of Alison Botha, one of the most insane stories I've ever heard to this day. Also, just want to say, in case Allison sees this, Allison, you were literally the biggest inspiration to so many people, and I look up to you so much, but let's get into it. The 2 perpetrators that Allison had the misfortune of meeting were France and Tiance. A little bit of background on both. France was the son to a policeman. Childhood, fine. When he was a teenager, not fine. He made friends with the wrong crowd, was an absolute menace, got expelled from school, causing him and his family to move to what was back then known as Port Elizabeth in South Africa. One of France's biggest and favorite hobbies became worshiping the devil. Yes, he got a girlfriend who claimed to be the head witch of a coven, and together they spent a lot of time doing rituals and manifesting demons. And I know Satanism doesn't always mean worshiping the devil, but in this case it does. France soon dropped out of school and started claiming that he was possessed by the devil. And then he went into the army. How scary is that? A man that is claiming to be possessed by the devil being in charge and around so many weapons. He left the army, got married, had a baby, abandoned his family, got married again, had another baby, and throughout it all he was still getting in trouble with the law, committing petty crimes, and continuing to claim that he had supernatural powers from Satan himself. At 26 years old, France meets 19-year-old Tiance. Tiance had a rough upbringing. He was not born into the greatest family, unfortunately. At 15 years old, he dropped out of school, turned to substances to cope, got involved in petty crime, and then eventually also joined the army. That was one of the things that him and France had in common, but Tiance also dated a witch girlfriend, and the 2 of them worshipped the devil together as well. France and Tiance met in June of 1994, and they would become a volatile pairing. France told his new friend Tiance that he possessed the power of the devil, and I think that Tiance started to look up to France a little bit. The 2 of them would go on to do horrible, disgusting things. They frequently visited graveyards in the middle of the night doing weird things, and then they would go on an SA spree. They would go out looking for women to attack and SA simply because they wanted to. And because France specifically thought that he deserved to, because he thought he was so attractive that women loved him, and he thought that he deserved to get whatever he wanted to get from them. Sick, sick, sick. On December 4th of 1994, France and Tiance SA'd a victim together, a 21-year-old woman that was 3 months pregnant. After the attack, the woman went straight to the police station and reported it. France and Tiance got arrested, but released pending a further court appearance, and it was before that pending court appearance that Allison would be taken as their victim and put through things no human being should ever be put through, let alone survive. Allison surviving the things that she was put through was unheard of. To me, there's no other way to describe it other than a miracle, truly. Alison Botha grew up a very happy and loved girl. Her mother raised her in a beautiful way, and she was really raised to be such an incredible person with nothing but love to give. At the time of this case, Allison was 27 years old and she was thriving, living her best life. She had graduated school, spent a few years traveling around, and had chosen to settle down in what was known back then as Port Elizabeth in South Africa. December 18th of 1994, it was a Sunday. After a fun night out with her friends, Allison came home after dropping off one of her friends at her apartment. She pulled into her parking lot, pulls in, parks her car, turns her car off, and all of a sudden someone swings open her driver's side door, and Allison is caught so off guard when she sees a man standing right outside her door with a sharp weapon. That man was 26-year-old France. He looked at her and said, quote, "Move over or I will kill you," end quote. At first, France keeps telling Allison that he's not going to hurt her. He says that he just needs her car for something. Big fat lie. France asks Allison what her name is. She quicks quick on her feet and tells him a fake name. Allison asks France what his name is, and he also gives a fake name. And Allison is trying to keep her calm, incredibly good under the worst kind of pressure, but she is pleading for him to let her out of the car. She says, "Just let me out, you can keep the car." But France, of course, has bad intentions. He tells her that he just needs to go and find his friend, so they drive to go find this friend. The friend, who is none other than 19-year-old Tians. Tians gets in the back of the car, and his eyes look scary. They're just black. They just look evil, and I imagine Allison's stomach turned at just the sight of him. This was late at night, by the way. It was dark outside, and France drove the three of them until there was no other cars around, and he pulled into a secluded area. Tians gets out of the car, leaving France and Allison alone, and France turns to her and says, "Are you going to fight?" And then he continues to SA her aggressively. Allison, in that moment, remembers trying to keep her dignity, aware of what was going on, but she kept thinking to herself, "He is doing this to your body, not to you. Your mind is safe. He can't touch your mind. You will get through this." She just kept repeating that to herself over and over again, trying to disassociate from what was going on, from the terrible situation that she was in. After France was done, he looked at Tians outside of the car and asked him if he wanted to SA Allison, talking about her in the most degrading manner, and Tians says yes, and he goes in the car and he takes his turn in SAing her. After that, the two of them stand there and discuss if they should let Allison go or if they should kill her. And remember, the two of them are pending a court appearance for the SA case they just committed 14 days ago, so the two of them in their little pea-sized brains, they're like, no, we shouldn't let her go, because if we let her go and she goes to the police, we will get in more trouble. So the two of them think that they have no other choice but to murder her. They're having this discussion right in front of Allison, and because their brains are so small, they're talking amongst themselves. They're using their real names, France and Tians, and Allison takes note of that, which is very important. Before she knew it, Allison was outside of the car on the ground. France was on top of her, attacking her with both of his hands around her neck, using as much force as he could, to the point where he crushed her windpipe, cutting off her air supply completely, causing Allison to zone out. Then France grabbed the sharp weapon, took it to Allison's stomach over and over again, like a frenzy attack 35 times, and him and Tians thought that that would be it. But then they realized that Allison was still alive, so they took the sharp weapon across her neck 16 times. And remember, France had crushed Allison's windpipe with his hands, and unknowingly so, when he took the sharp weapon, he cut through the windpipe, giving her air supply again. So basically, he did the opposite of what he was trying to do. Allison regains consciousness. She comes back to it when she hears France and Tians again talking amongst themselves about whether or not they think she's still alive. When she hears this, she stays as still as she possibly can to make them think that she isn't. And it works. They leave her there, deciding that there was no possible way that she could have survived that attack. They throw her clothes that were inside of the car out of the car, and they drive off in her car. Allison is left there, lying on the ground in the dark in the middle of nowhere, attempting to assess the situation, trying to figure out what to do next, and I don't even know how. She had at least 50 injuries. I don't even know how your mind can come up with a clear thought, but she's trying to think when she hears a gurgling sound. She's confused for a second until she realizes that that sound is coming from her throat. The sound was her windpipe. They're just going in and out through it because she can't control it. She goes to feel her neck with her hand, but she feels nothing. Because her injuries are so severe, there's just a massive gaping hole, and she feels nothing but blood. Allison laid on that floor, and she thought, I'm not gonna let them get away with this. I'm not gonna let them do this to another person. She thought that at the very least, she would do what she could to hope and try and help her attackers get caught, which is when she took the little strength that she had left and wrote their names on the sand, France and Tians. Right after that, she wrote on the sand what she wanted people to know that she was thinking about before she passed. She took her hand and she wrote, "I love Mom." And then Allison continued to lay there thinking that this was the end, but it wasn't. And Allison has said, quote, "I realized my life was too valuable to let go of, and that gave me the courage to survive," end quote. That gives me chills every time. Also, now is a good time for me to tell you, if you have a queasy stomach, you should probably go. Allison started to move, thinking, I may as well give it my all. I'm not going to go down without a fight. When she started to get up on her feet, she was on her hands and knees when she felt something wet and something slimy on her feet. It was her intestines. Franz and Tien's had injured her abdomen so bad that her intestines were falling out of her body. She struggled trying to gather them back together, putting them back inside of her. When she noticed that her shirt had been thrown out of the car, she grabbed the shirt and used that to pack her intestines inside of her and pulled it as close as she could against her to try and keep them in. And Allison tried to stand back up again, but then her vision went black. She couldn't see anything, so she's holding her intestines in with one hand. And with the other, she reaches up to her eyes to see what's going on, but she feels nothing. There's nothing there. Because of the injuries to her neck and her throat, her head was hanging off backwards. She couldn't see because her head was halfway detached off her body. So with her only free hand, she reaches up to her head behind her body, pulls her head forward, kind of back in place, helping her vision return temporarily. She's literally holding her body together with both of her hands. I have no clue. The strength it must have taken is hard for me to comprehend. Allison managed to drag herself onto the road, the full moon lighting her path, hoping that somebody would stop and rescue her. When she got to the road, she collapsed. She saw headlights. One car drove towards her, but straight past her, but the second car stopped, thankfully. In that car was a man called Tien, not to be confused with the perpetrator Tien's. Other people were in the car as well, but he was a vet, so he had some sort of medical knowledge, and he was an absolute hero that night. As soon as he saw Allison's injuries, he ripped off his shirt and used it to apply pressure on Allison's injuries. Tien also noticed that Allison's thyroid was out of her neck, and he had some knowledge in medicine, obviously, so he knew how to place the thyroid back in place somehow, while one of his other friends called 911. The ambulance took so long to get there. 2 hours, 2 whole hours. What do you mean? But the entire time, Tien was trying to do everything that he could to keep Allison with him. He came up with a system for her to squeeze his hand in response to him because she couldn't speak, obviously. And he kept telling her over and over again, you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. Please keep them open. Please keep them open. After 2 hours, the ambulance arrived, rushed Allison to the hospital, and the entire time Tien refused to leave her side. Allison was immediately taken into surgery. The wound to her neck was so severe the doctors could see the top of her spine. Those doctors had to put in so much work to save her life, but luckily the doctor that was on call that night was a throat specialist. Like, what are the odds of that? I don't know, but the odds were in Allison's favor. Doctors have said if Tien didn't put her thyroid back in place or whatever he did, then Allison would not have made it. It was also found that the injuries to her stomach somehow missed every vital organ, and the injuries to her neck and throat missed every major artery. If that was not the case, then Allison would not have made it to see another day. Absolutely insane. But after hours of surgery, Allison survived and she went into ICU for recovery. She couldn't talk after the surgery, obviously, so when talking to authorities, she just wrote down on a piece of paper her attackers' names. But get this, police said, that's not good enough. We need you to say their names out loud. What? So the tube that Allison was literally using to breathe was taken out long enough so that Allison could say out loud, my attackers were Franz and Tien's. And only after that did police go and immediately arrest them. And when they were arrested, officers told them that they were wanted for SA and attempted murder. And they were so confused about the attempted murder because they thought that there was absolutely no chance that Allison had survived that, but against all odds, she had. They were both charged with 8 charges. They pled guilty and were sentenced to life in prison in August of 1995 with no parole. Oh, and by the way, in trial, Franz tried to blame his actions on the fact that he was possessed by Satan. So there's that. Allison was discharged from the hospital on New Year's Eve. She moved back in with her mom, who helped take care of her. But she still had so much recovery to do, not only physically, but also emotionally. But Allison knew that she wanted to use her story to help others. So she started traveling around the world, telling her stories in at least 35 countries, helping inspire other survivors to come forward and tell their stories as well. Since then, she has written 2 books, and Allison has said, quote, the attack has put me on this path where I get to travel the world and help inspire other people, end quote. Allison met and married a man, and I think they are now separated, but doctors had told her that because of her injury she would not be able to have her own child, but I'm so happy to say that she was. Allison fell pregnant and she was able to carry her child full term, and Tien, our lovely hero Tien, became a doctor after that incident, and he was one of the doctors who helped birth Allison's second child. How cute is that? Oh, and one more thing that's gonna make you guys mad for a second. In July of 2023, after only serving 28 years, Franz and Tien's were granted parole and placed under supervision decision. When that happened, Allison posted on her Facebook page, she said, quote, "The day I hoped and prayed would never come. When I was asked, how will you feel if they ever get parole? My immediate answer was always, I'm hoping I'll never find out," end quote. Absurd. The people that did that are allowed to just be free and walk free? What do you mean? Because actually, what do you mean? But I'm so happy to say that this year in 2025, the decision to grant them parole was taken back. So both of them were sent back to jail, thankfully, and they will remain in custody, which makes me so incredibly glad for Allison. Like, thank God. And I want to end this video with a quote from Allison. It reads, quote, "Remind yourself that you do not have to take responsibility for what others do. Life is not a collection of what happens to you, but of how you've responded to what has happened to you," end quote. I've known this story for a long time, and every single time that I talk about it or read about it or hear about it, it makes me want to cry. Again, Allison, on the off chance that you're seeing this, I'm gonna message you right now. I would feel incredibly grateful to have the chance to talk to you, and I hope that I told your story the way that you would want to have it told. But yeah, that's it from me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Allison's insane, inspiring story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.